Hey everybody, Andy Ogles here. It is State of the Union night. Joe Biden will be in the House, joint session of Congress. I'm here with my friend and I'm your congressman, Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire. So it's a special treat for me to have you here, someone who's a voice for conservatism for the country. You know, we have a lot of young folks, that next generation of leaders that look, I mean, not necessarily to me, but to you, because they have such great access to you and you're so pointed and the stories you cover. So first, let me just say welcome. And you know, you're the professional. And so at some point, I think I just turn this over to you and you interview me, but I think technically I'm supposed to interview you.
I'll interview you on your show. Thank you so much for having me. This is fabulous. And talk about making me feel comfortable. Not only do you welcome me to the Capitol, but you first welcome me to a podcast. So I feel nice and at home. It's really such an honor, and not only an honor to be at the State of the Union, and I'm not just blowing smoke, but it's an honor to be your guest in particular, because I have been reliably informed that you are among the 5 most conservative members of the House of Representatives.
That's right. So I'm ranked number 4, fourth most conservative member of Congress. I'll do better next year. So, you know, I've got to shoot for number 1. And,
Right.
and quite frankly, you know, once you kind of hit the top 5, there is a little bit of a competition at this point. Like, you know, like I've got to protect my number. Like last thing I want to do is fall backwards. So like I've got to be, I'm kidding. You know, it's one of those, you do the right thing for the right reasons. I think the reason why I won my primary rather handily was that I was known as that fighter. So during COVID, you know, I didn't back down. I didn't succumb to the mandates. We kept our businesses and our community open. And I would like to think that I've done what I said I would do, is that I would come up here and fight. I would try to change this place. You know, and when you look at the nonsense across the country, and there's so many things we could talk about, the southern border, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the China, their aggression towards Taiwan. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, whether it's foreign policy or domestic policy, where Joe Biden has just been an abject failure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I think he gets up in the morning, he has advisors that tells him this is the right thing to do, and he says, okay, we're going to do the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Because at this point, he's like trying to be the worst president in
Does
history.
he even have the advisors, though, I guess is my fear. Because what I couldn't understand, and I suppose we'll see a little bit of this tonight at the State of the Union, is the man just a marionette? You know, is he being walked around by puppeteers, or is he really in control of things? And I would have said it was the former. I would have said he has nothing. He doesn't know what end is up, except for the fact that clearly the Democrat establishment wants this guy gone. They recognize that no amount of PR from the establishment media is going to convince people that we're not facing an invasion on the southern border. The economy is strong. Right? Everyone knows that this is a disaster, and we're on the brink of World War III in two different places.
Yeah.
But the man is running, and no matter they want to replace him with Gavin Newsom or they want to replace him with whomever, that man is not going anywhere. I mean, I think they'll have to drag him out of the White House, kicking and screaming.
Well, you think about, and it's sad to joke about this, but, there was that movie Weekend at Bernie's.
Right.
Right. And he's dead. They've got the sunglasses on, and he has two guys propping him up. And we make that joke, but the reality is that's the way the rest of the world sees our president right now. Like the equivalent of like the Italian Saturday Night Live, they're making fun of Joe Biden. And when you look at the failed withdrawal from Afghanistan, we have this Air Force base there or airport there that could have been an incredibly strategic location for us. We could have kept a special forces contingent there. Like it would have been valuable to keep, right? But instead we withdraw. It's a failure. We leave all sorts of equipment behind. We leave people behind. And then what happens, right? Because of that failure and because of the failed policies of Joe Biden, you see Russia, and they've been telegraphing they wanted Ukraine for how many years, right?
Since the fall of the Soviet Union, probably.
Right, exactly. And of course, Crimea, there's all of that, and they move into the Donbas region, but they only did that because of Joe Biden, because there was this moment of weakness being put forth by our president. They didn't do that under Trump.
Right.
They knew better.
Even the irony of the Democrats positioning themselves as the great defenders of Ukraine and Republicans being, I think, rightly skeptical of just giving them endless money for no battlefield advantage. But the irony of it is that Zelensky had said at the outset of the war that the war was Biden's fault. And he said that because he said, if you lift sanctions against Russia, if you lift sanctions that Trump and congressional Republicans were strong about enforcing, if you lift sanctions on Nord Stream 2, then Putin is going to be emboldened. He's going to go in and invade. And guess what happened? Exactly that.
Well, and then so now you look at China. They want Taiwan, and there's the saber rattling there. Knock on wood. I don't think they'll make a move on the near term, but again, under this presidency, it wouldn't surprise me, right? Because he is viewed as weak, and so. And then to your point about Ukraine, like literally before the invasion, I'm fairly certain that Ukraine was ranked like the most corrupt nation in Europe. I mean, if they weren't at the bottom, they were near the bottom, right? And so now we have this situation where we're giving them billions of dollars, and we know they're stealing parts of it. Like this isn't rhetoric, this isn't hyperbole. Like you've got these guys that have been working for the Ukrainian government their entire careers, and they're buying $7 million homes.
Right.
Like you don't do that on Ukrainian salary, right? You know what I'm saying?
They're as good at handling our foreign aid as the Democrats are in Congress at picking their stocks. They're really good at that too.
Well, and again, you look at. So I'll stop there, but it's one of those, I voted against all the supplementals. And part of that is because you look at, all right, so what's our ROI? Like, what are we getting out of this? There should be a metric there, right? Can peace be attained? That's a reasonable question. If it can be attained, what does it look like? And then if it can't be attained, what's our exit strategy? And so none of that has been articulated, I think, clearly to Congress or the American people. And then you combine with the grift and the theft and all the other stuff, it's like, no, just stop.
Well, this to me is, I think, what's most frustrating to the American people broadly, not the people who are professionally in politics, but who just, they have something that is lacking in Washington, which is common sense. They look and they say, okay, we care a lot about the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We don't care at all about the territorial integrity of the United States. And then even here, tonight at the Capitol, the Democrats have erected a big, beautiful wall around the Capitol. And so what this tells me is that all the times that Schumer and Pelosi and Biden have said walls don't work, well, they seem to work pretty well tonight, and they seem to believe that walls work. So then what does that tell me? What that tells me is that the D.C. ruling class, which is the liberal class, the Democrat class, they consider the American people a greater threat to our institutions of democracy than they would consider millions of foreign nationals unvetted pouring across our border. What an insult.
That's right. Well, and to your point, like there's this big wall around, the Capitol tonight to protect us, if you will, Joe Biden. But if walls didn't work, then why is that erected, right? But that being said, when you go to the southern border, when you look at Texas, and kudos to Abbott, he's doing a great job with the ability he has as a governor. But in Arizona, however, it's like the Wild West. I mean, like there's literally parts of the Arizona border that are controlled by the cartel, and I know because I've been there. And so, I went back during August, and we go to fly into Tucson, and you go down to the border, and I went unannounced, so the Border Patrol was not happy that I was there. They had a code name for us over the radio because we just showed up, and we're operating the daytime. We were crossing in Mexico. We were there at night. They called us Mayhem because
Mayhem. It's a code name Pain in the Rear or something like that. Yeah.
But anyway, so if you can picture this wall, it goes on for miles, right? But if you look closely and you back away from the wall, you can see that about every quarter mile, we've cut out sections of the fence. So it's literally wide open.
Right.
And then about 6 to 8 inches off the ground where we've cut it off so that no one trips coming into our country, we put gravel over it so that you don't trip, There's no trespassing signs on our side of the border, so that Border Patrol can enforce no trespassing if an American citizen goes down to investigate the border, or maybe he's a volunteer and whatever. But if you cross into Mexico, there's no trespassing. There aren't any signs. There's no stop, go home, none of that. I mean, we literally have an app. There's an app out there that if you're an illegal, you're coming through Mexico, tells you where to go.
So what are they thinking? Because if you look at the polls, and I think the polls have been pretty accurate, actually, this cycle at least, this is killing Biden. The vast majority of Americans want to fix this problem. It cuts across both parties and independents too. So is it simply a cynical calculation that if they flood the country with foreign nationals, statistically most of them down the line will vote Democrat? Is it something deeper and more pathological? They just don't think we have the right to borders. The Democrats think it's stolen land, or what is it?
So I think the answer to that question is twofold. One is short term, and one is long term.
Yeah.
So I think what you're doing, or what you're seeing, is like states like Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, they're flooding those states with illegals, presuming that they'll vote Democrat, and they'll be able to hold those for the White House, that they'll be blue states. And then I think more sinister is reapportionment. So every 10 years you have a census.
Right.
And so you have states like California that have population flight, states like New York that have population flight. However, during the census, they count illegals in the total population.
Right.
And so when you fast forward and you look at what they're doing, where are they sending the illegals? To states that would be otherwise considered battleground states, and states that are having population flight. So this affects the presidency and the census in 10 years, because New York and California, presumably in 10 years, will lose congressional seats unless you backfill with illegals.
This didn't occur to me. I thought I'd considered this issue from every angle and all the short, medium, and long term, but the part that hadn't occurred to me was the population flight. I was born in New York. I've lived in California for all my sins, Mussolini's hellscape, and pleased now to breathe the sweet air of freedom. But I wondered, if the Democrats know that the illegal immigration creates all sorts of social problems, New York City Mayor Eric Adams is begging them to stop sending them. And then, of course, the moment he tries to meet with the Biden White House about this, there's an investigation into Eric Adams, and he backs off the issue. That's a topic for another time. But I thought, if they know this is a social problem, why are they sending it to their own states? But that's why, because people are pouring out of California, they're pouring out of New York, they're going to states like Tennessee and Florida and Texas. So they have to make up those seats somehow.
That's right. Otherwise, the next census, Texas, Tennessee, Florida, we get more congressional seats.
Right.
And they don't want another Andy Ogles in Congress.
They do not.
Right? And so they don't want another Matt Gaetz or Chip Roy, the conservative, the hyper conservatives, right? Uber conservatives. So the only way they can block us and keep us from reproducing, at least as far as gaining more seats, is to prevent Tennessee or Florida or Texas from picking up those seats. And again, that is, you're talking about, an insurrection. When you talk about a sinister plot, like this is real electioneering.
Yeah.
And it has a 10-year runway. Like this is sinister.
No,
and criminal, quite frankly.
So what do you make of it's a balance. If they just, well, I don't know, maybe they have just totally flooded the country and they haven't faced the consequences for it. But presumably at a certain point, it could get so bad that it costs Biden the presidency. It costs the Democrats the presidency. Maybe it costs them the Senate. Who knows? And then, Republicans maybe could legislate on this issue. There are a lot of squishes among the Republicans who maybe don't want to. But is there a real threat that Biden feels right now? Oh man, I have to do something about the migration issue. Or no, do they think they just have a wide open field?
Well, I think like a lot of their issues, they tend to overplay their hand. So like on the transgender issue. But again, I think on this border issue, I think they've overplayed their hand and they're in panic mode. I think if they could get away with it, they would jettison Biden. Michelle Obama just recently said no, that she's not going to run. I think she was probably their best replacement. Yeah. So now you have Gavin Newsom has been circling. You've got Whitmer out of Michigan. You've got Andy Beshear in Kentucky. But, in July when they have their Democratic convention, is there anyone strong enough that could mount a grassroots campaign to galvanize the Democratic voter? I don't know. I mean, maybe you have a take on it. I don't see a candidate.
No, I think no. I'd heard the rumors, and some of my friends in media and in Congress were floating these rumors about Michelle Obama. I always thought
one of them.
You were. Yeah, that's right. You were. I wasn't going to call you out, but
I was attacked for it, like always.
And it made sense in that Joe Biden said, "I'm going to pick a vice president who is a black woman. I am taking away all the other candidates. I'm purely playing identity politics." That left him three choices of prominent Democrat black women. It was Karen Bass, a communist. She wasn't going anywhere. Susan Rice was the fall man for Benghazi. That wasn't going to work. She's not a good retail politician either. Or Kamala Harris, who has a pulse and we thought could speak. I guess she can't even really do that. But in any case, she's not going to be the great savior for the Democrats. And they can't skip over the first black woman vice president with the whitest man ever in history, Gavin Newsom. So who does that leave? Well, the only savior for the Democrats could be Michelle, but she doesn't want the job. She was in the White House for 2 terms. They're making a lot of money. They have a perfectly pleasant life. Why does she need to get back into it? So now the Democrats are it seems to me, are totally up the creek. And even if Gavin Newsom's a talented retail politician, even if Beshear has done reasonably well, none of those guys have grassroots support to oust old Joe. It's just not going to, Joe Biden's been a fixture for now 52 years in Washington. Not going to happen.
Yeah, and so I think the only thing, and I think you're going to see this tonight with the State of the Union, is Joe Biden is going to blame the Republican Party. He's going to talk about, we can't govern, and he's going to blame Trump or Trump-era policies. And try to shift that narrative that it's the Republicans' fault. But here's the issue. And you can look at the lapel pins that we have here, Lake and Riley, is that, you have a young, innocent life that was taken at the hands of an illegal. And in the last week, you've had cases of young girls, minors, one in Louisiana, one in Virginia, that were raped by an illegal. And so every murder, every rape, every burglary, every assault, every carjacking at the hands of an illegal is Joe Biden's fault. Like, he's allowed this invasion of our country. And so, which is why we impeached Mayorkas. I have a bill called the Send Them Back Act, which literally anyone who's come here illegally under Joe Biden's term, because you got to start somewhere. I mean, arguably you would backdate that all the way, right?
1983 or something.
Exactly. But, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So we thought we'd take the newest block of individuals that are here illegally, but they would automatically be eligible. They would be deported.
Yeah.
And I understand that's messy. And I understand it's going to be dramatic and kids are going to be crying. But look, you're here illegally.
Yeah.
And if I'm in France illegally with my children, they're going to kick my butt out.
Right. And I think it's really important, to focus on the particular cases here. So this case with Lake and Riley was just it was egregious because of what happened. And it's especially egregious because it was so preventable. The man, her accused killer, was arrested and released. Then he's arrested again in New York and released. Then he's arrested again in Georgia for theft. And he gets off with a misdemeanor citation. So, 3 opportunities.
Yeah.
And had the law enforcement, and by law enforcement, I'm not even talking about cops on the ground. I mean the political class, the rulers. Had they just done their job at any step of the way, an actual human being, a young American girl, would be alive today. And so something that the Democrats are very good at, they're very good at putting a face to political issues, even if it's a crazy issue. I mean, President Biden tonight has invited all of these women who are only famous for aborting their children, but he's raising up their faces. Forget about their children, forget about all the victims of abortion. He raises up their profile as they're the sympathetic figure. And yet, when we're talking about conservative policymakers, you know, we tend to be on the side, I think, of the more legitimate victims here. Yeah. And yet conservatives, because I guess it's a good thing, but because conservatives tend to think a little bit more logically and reasonably, we forget the emotional component, the narrative component, and, you know, connecting these abstract political issues with real people, with real victims.
Yeah, and you know, I think sometimes we, as conservatives, we're hesitant to try to capitalize on a situation. But you know, Rahm Emanuel, former member of Congress, was Obama's chief of staff. He's famous for saying, "Never let a crisis go to waste," and they're great at that. And like to your point, so we've got to start getting down and making this real, tangible, and personal for people. And if you look at Tennessee, you know, it costs, and I testified to this number and before Homeland Security that, you know, my team did the research that illegal immigration costs the state of Tennessee roughly $850 million to $1 billion a year. So now think about that for a minute. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind it.
Right?
You know, I could use it in my bank account. It'd be all right.
And so, you know, that's a staggering number that can be used for so many other things, like, you know, we have a mental health crisis in this country. You've got veteran suicides are still hovering between 20 and 22. You look at rural communities and poor communities in the state of Tennessee that don't have good textbooks or computers. Like, there's things that we should be purchasing or doing for U.S. citizens, for Tennesseans, but instead we're having to pay for illegal immigration. So if you wonder why the governor of Tennessee might send a contingent of National Guard to the southern border, it's because there's a real intangible cost to Tennesseans.
Right.
So if we can do anything to support Texas or Arizona or New Mexico to stem the flow, then there's a cost benefit to the state, to all the states.
And it's important for everyone. You know, the reason that we oppose this mass level of migration, most of it illegal, is not because we don't like immigrants, right? I like immigrants perfectly fine. But, you know, when the country was founded, going all the way back to the 17th century, Governor Winthrop called on us to be a model of Christian charity, a shining city on a hill. This is a line that has pervaded American history. Ronald Reagan loved to use this line. But what does it mean to be a shining city on a hill? Does it mean you're going to be a boarding house? Does it mean you're going to not have functional borders? No, it means you're going to provide an example to the rest of the world, and hopefully the rest of the world can emulate that, can benefit from that, and you'll take in some degree of migration, but you've got to make sure that your country is very strong, because if your country is not strong, if you don't have functional borders, if you have crime going through the roof, if you have laws not being enforced, you have a collapse of self-government, you're not going to be good to anyone. You're not going to be good for your citizens. You're not even going to be good for the foreigners who would like to come here.
Yeah, you know, you get on an airplane and they give you the little speech, the safety speech, and it says, you know, if the mask drop, make sure you put your mask on before you help your neighbor. I mean, It's the same type of thing.
Right.
It's basic, you know, instinct and survival of. But that being said, is we're in this place. We're in an inflection point, I think, politically, with this migration, this invasion that's taken place. That if we don't come up with real solutions, the republic changes forever. And I think you could say, not to be overly dramatic, that the republic will be lost. And, you know, I think there's 3 principles, I think, you know, we're the world's sole superpower and we're a sovereign nation, is that you've got to have a strong military, you've got to have secure borders, and you've got to have fair and honest elections. And I think depending on who you talk to, if we went out on the street right now, some people would argue that we don't check any of those 3 boxes.
Right.
And certainly not the border one. And on the election side, some states are better than others. And so we've got to get back to America first. I'm not saying America alone. You know, I stand with Israel. I've been very vocal about that. I've been criticized for that. I stand with Taiwan. And they're both of their right to be free and to protect their people. And so as we look to the future, we've got to start prioritizing our own country, our own borders. And we've got to prioritize our allies and our friends over, I don't mean to pick on Ukraine, but if I have to choose between Israel or Ukraine, I'm going to pick Israel. You know, they are our eyes and ears on the ground in that region. You know, there's no telling how many countless thousands or hundreds of thousands of lives have been saved because the intelligence gathering of the IDF and the Israeli government. And so we've got to support them. And look, they live in a bad neighborhood, the worst neighborhood in the world. And so we've got to be their partner. We've got to stand with them. And quite frankly, we've got to get out of their way. For too long, the United States of America and Europe have meddled in Israeli domestic and foreign policy. And I've said it once and I'll say it again. If Israel needs to go biblical on their enemies, that is a decision for Israel to make alone. And if there was a rogue element in Mexico that were lobbing missiles into Houston, if they were making these incursion attacks into the United States of America, the United States of America would occupy Mexico City within 72 hours.
Right, right.
We may or may not give it back. We would create a DMZ.
Yeah.
There are things that we would do would be part of the natural order of things.
So I love this point on the natural order of things, because when you say a phrase like America first, the liberals will recoil and they'll say that this is somehow immoral. This is perfectly natural and perfectly moral. You know, you have more of an obligation to your family than you do to someone else's family. You have more of an obligation to your local community, to your state, than you do to some other state, you know, Gavin Newsom in California or something like that. And you have more of an obligation to your country than you do to other people's countries. And there's nothing wrong with that. We like other people too. But there are gradations of charity. It would be totally insane if I put some other guy's family and some other country on the other side of the world over my own. And yet it seems to be that's exactly what the Democrats want to do. They just want to totally, I guess on every issue, they just want to totally invert the natural order of things.
Well, and again, we're at this inflection point, and literally you have communists and Marxists elected to Congress on the other side of the aisle, and
self-described.
Well, yeah, that's right. I'm not casting aspersions. Like they're claiming it, right, owning it. But with that, we're in the last few minutes of the podcast here. It's certainly been an honor to have you. I'm so excited that you are able to come and be my guest. The Daily Wire is such a great addition to the Nashville community. You were certainly a great addition to the Nashville community, and again, a voice for conservatism, so thank you. But with that, I'll give you kind of the closing last word. Any final thoughts?
I have expressed all of my thoughts other than my gratitude for the invitation. It's such a pleasure. I speaking of foreign affairs, am a refugee to Tennessee. You know, I've fled political persecution elsewhere in the country, so it's just so wonderful to be in Nashville. And the community has been so wonderful in Tennessee. Great place, obviously, to raise your kids, to live, to do business. The Daily Wire's there. But the cherry on top of that is that we get to claim one of the very most conservative and courageous members of Congress out there, willing to take, I know how this town works. I've been around D.C. for long enough. There's an acid about the place, a corrosion. And the corrosion specifically targets people's spines, I notice. The moment they get to Washington, they lose their courage. And you have not. You've stood really, really firm. And I look forward to joining you tonight at the Capitol and to hearing how they're going to spin a situation that we hope will turn around very quickly in November.
Well, thank you again. I really appreciate that. I mean, I did not pay him to do it, though I probably should. But thank you for joining us. Please check out Michael Knowles at the Daily Wire. Truly a voice of conservatives. So if you don't watch his podcast, please do. With that, let's go watch Joe Biden lie to the American people. Y'all have a great night. God bless.